Welcome to the Team Teach podcast. I'm Clare, and in each episode you'll find me talking with an expert guest to learn more about behaviour. We squeeze a lot into each episode. You'll listen to the latest thinking in behaviour, continue your professional development with our book recommendation, and then I'll send you away with 3 practical tips you can use in your setting. I'm joined today by John Murray. John Murray is a principal Team Teach tutor and has been involved in education for over 30 years. The majority of his working career has been spent supporting children and young people who are experiencing social, emotional, mental health, relational and behavioural challenges. John has a consistent track record of working successfully with schools, other agencies, the staff who work in them and the children, young people and families. And today John and I are talking about functions of behaviour. Enjoy the episode. Hi John, how are you?
I'm good, Claire. Nice to see you.
It is very nice to see you, John. We are both Team Teach tutors, which I think is helpful to know at the start of the podcast. And we're talking about really the functions of behaviour today. So it's going to be quite a meaty topic, I think, for a short podcast, but we'll do our best. I wanted to start off the episode by thinking about a reflective question. So what you wish you knew then that you know now about the topic?
I think I probably, what I wish I knew then was that the question existed. I didn't even know there was things like functions to behaviours and drivers of behaviours. I was doing a course this week, and in the introduction, there was a course participant who has just finished their ECT year, their early careers. I still call them NQTs, newly qualified teachers. And it made me think I'm just coming up to finish my 35th year in education, which made me feel really old. And I remember, and to relate it back to your question, my first couple of years as a teacher, I don't think I even considered the question about the children's behaviour, never mind what might be driving that behaviour, what were the functions of the behaviour. And I think you're so caught up in trying to get everything right in terms of delivering the curriculum and processes and procedures in your learning environment, and you're totally consumed by that. And I remember just thinking, well, children will behave. That's what they'll do. 1 million. So if I could get on my time machine and go back to that young man, I'd probably ask him to maybe kind of deconstruct it a little bit more, to think about it a little bit more, and to try and get behind the reasons for a behavior, which is where the question I find it really useful. What's the function of the behavior? Because it leads you into a process. Why is what's happening? And I think that young man teaching in that school in the East End of London, he never even asked the question, never mind pondered on it. So that's what I would probably do. just pose the question to myself.
It is interesting because I remember I was teaching in a pupil referral unit, and I had already been a practitioner that had worked in mental health services. I'd worked in schools, and the first trauma-informed course I had was at that pupil referral unit. And I think I'd already been in the area of education, mental health for over 10 years. Like, that was the first trauma-informed course. And when we think about drivers of behaviour, we know that trauma and, childhood experiences can definitely drive some of those behaviours. Yeah. But I just couldn't believe it. I remember sitting there being like, why have I not had this training before?
Yeah. And I think I would say even today, because the pressures on a teacher and staff in general in school are enormous. And I think we need to take that into account. And when I say the pressures, I mean, what they have to achieve and just the level of work they have to get through and what the outcomes that they're expected to meet. And then when you throw into the mix a child or some children or young people who may be expressing their concern, their difficulties through their behaviour, it really is almost on occasions like the straw that breaks the camel's back from the staff point of view, because the staff baseline, if you like, we talk about the baseline of people's behaviors. Their baseline is kind of a little bit anxious and stressed already, and then when you add in extra kind of stresses as they would perceive it, then it's difficult as a professional then to take a step back and say, why is what's happening? What is the function to this child's behavior? And I do see my role really as well, not just as a team teach tutor, but my role as a consultant with Jogo and going in and out of a lot of schools and a lot of learning environments is merely to create the capacity for staff to be able to stand back and say, ask the question. I'm worried about pupil A. I am concerned about their behaviors. Their behaviors are having a significant influence on my learning environment. And I want that professional then to feel that they have as I say, the capacity to be able to ask the question, what's the function of the behavior? Because that leads them, as I said earlier, into a process then. And that process is developing responses, but based on a solution-focused process. What's the function? Why is he or she doing what they're doing? And that's why I think it's a valuable question.
It's a really valuable question. And I think that process that you've talked about is super helpful for any practitioner, whether they're starting their career or further down the line, because it can take a bit of a light bulb moment, can't it, for practitioners to actually see that beneath that behavior is an individual that might be distressed or might be having a really hard time. But you have to ask the question to be able to get there, don't you?
Yeah, you do. And I think as well, the reason why I like the question is because it to begin with, it takes a very complex situation and starts off with a simple question. Sometimes, and it may be say more about me actually, but sometimes I think we can deconstruct things too quickly, too much, and make them more complicated than they need to be. Now, that we are talking about, you know this, Claire, as much as I do, we are talking about complex situations when we're talking about children, young people in learning environments, and not interacting negatively because they're communicating some distress. And the more they interact negatively, the more distress they get because the environment becomes toxic for them. So it is complex. And then you've got the relationship between adults and children in that learning environment and how that is compromised. It is complex. But for me, if we start off with that really simple question, it's let's not deconstruct this too much to begin with. What is the function of the behavior? And when we ask that question, the answer to begin with can be very simple. Are they trying to avoid something or are they trying to get something? And then you have a third option, which is by avoiding doing something, I get something. By getting something, I avoid something. So your third option is it's both. It's an avoid and a get. Now, I'm not saying that's the solution. I'm not saying that's where we stop the process, but that's the beginning of the process. And if I could just give you a little example, because of how I saw the kind of effectiveness of this question. Working. I was running a level 2-day team teach course for a group of staff who are attached to a mainstream school, but it was a unit for children with particular needs. And anyway, we were doing the course and we were doing a tabletop, and it was basically around functions of behavior. But I asked them to think of real life children and that they're working with, and the issues that they're working with, and the behaviors of concern that they have, that they're experiencing from those children, and how their plans reflect what the child is communicating to them. And you know, as a tutor, you do, Claire, we just kind of let them get on with it and kind of move in and out, and but let them have their conversations. And then I saw a moment, and it was like a penny dropping moment, and there was like two of them in the group going, "Oh my God." And they started writing down stuff. And I went over and I said, you don't mind me interrupting you. What's the oh my God bit? And they said, we've got this, I won't go into it, obviously, we've got this plan around this particular pupil. And we've just realized by just deconstructing, just by asking the question, this simple question to begin with, that our whole plan is based on the fact that she's trying to avoid something. And the avoid was a particular literacy activity that involved putting pen to paper. It was a bit more complex than that, but their starting point for their plan was that the child was trying to avoid doing that particular literacy activity. And as they kind of worked through the question, what's the function? They actually got to the point where they said, she's not trying to avoid it. What she's actually trying to do is, at that particular moment in the day, she's trying to get to the ball pool, because the ball pool is accessible at that time of day. And they could have been offering her an ice cream parlor rather than a literacy activity, and she wouldn't have taken it. She wanted to get to the ball pool. So then they decided to go, right, let's peel back our whole plan here, and let's start from the point that she's trying to get to the ball pool and not avoid doing the activity. And their plan, so that there was a lot of elements of their plan which stayed the same, but it was in the implementation of the plan that had a significant change, because their starting point was completely different from what they thought their starting point should be. And that made me, I think nothing to do with me as a trainer or whatever, it made me kind of think, this is really powerful stuff, and it's such a simple question.
But it's also being able to, I think you mentioned it really in the introduction bit, but almost as someone supporting a team like that, is providing that space to be able to ask and answer the question, because everyone is so overloaded in whatever service they're working in. So it can be really difficult to find the headspace to even contemplate the question, what's the function? And leading on from that, I was thinking about some of the courses that I've run, maybe a level 1 or level 2 team teach course. And there actually are some staff members that might be quite stuck in their mindsets and actually find that kind of question even really quite difficult to contemplate. If you work with parents and carers, our family engagement training equips you with the skills, knowledge and understanding to build positive relationships. Help your families understand and support their child's behaviour, recognise the challenges and opportunities in your organisation, and receive an exclusive range of resources you can use to practically support your families. Take a look at this exciting training option on the Team Teach website. So I was just wondering your thoughts around that, around our staff members that might be quite stuck and find those questions, what's the function, even hard to address.
I know exactly what you mean. You do, and with my Jogo hat on, working one-to-one with teachers, developing plans for pupils that they refer to us. You do come across staff members who are, I'm loath to say that they're kind of stuck in their ways. They're kind of, I've done it for 20 years this way, why should I do it any different? But I think they're feeling, I think there's a lot of kind of stress and anxiety that they amongst staff at times when they're dealing with some very, very challenging behaviors within their learning environment. And their perception is, this is stopping me from teaching. So they're not their starting point isn't the child, it's them. This is stopping me from teaching. Your behavior, Clare, is stopping me from teaching, not just you, but the other 29. Whereas back to what's the function of the behavior, the question doesn't start with me. It starts with, let's have a look at what's happening to the child here. But so it's not just a case of asking them to think about the child's behavior. It's almost a case of asking them to stop thinking about it as something to do with them and about them, and almost a slight on them. And the best way to sell it is to say, look, the hard way around this is just to kind of not just insist with the child, you must do what you're told. This is my learning environment. I'm not going to kind of try and deconstruct it too much and be solution focused. I often say to people, that's a really hard option. I'm too old. I want the easy option now. The easier option is to ask, why is what happening? And can we develop a solution around it? And we start off with asking, what's the function of the behavior? What are they trying to avoid? And let's just say they're trying to avoid the learning environment. Why are they trying to avoid the learning environment? Who's responsible for creating the atmosphere and the agenda and the learning environment? It's the staff. They're a massive dynamic in that learning environment. I'm not criticizing. I've run learning environments where I've had children engage in some really challenging behaviors. And emotionally, it can be really draining as a teacher. But as I say, the hard option is to kind of almost fight it and go, this isn't how, you're not to do this. For me, that's the hard option. So I try to sell it to staff, whether it's on a team teach course, staff who are a little bit kind of, not sure about this. And I try to sell them whether it's on a team teach course or whether it's I'm working with them through my Jogo work. I almost say to them, let's have a look at the easy option, because the easy option is to then say, let's try and provide and see if we can provide some kind of solutions so that I don't have this behavior, causing me stress and anxieties. So let's think about the easy option. So we go back to thinking about what's the function of the behavior. But then I think we then have to move it on a little bit and say, once we decide what the function is, and it's not an exact science, by the way. I think we've got to be careful about this. It's not an exact science. But if we say, oh, he's trying to avoid, or she's trying to get, or they're trying to avoid and get, whatever it is, then we have to ask what's driving that. Is the main driver a sensory need? Is it, you've talked about trauma-informed practice. Has the child suffered an ACE in their life? Maybe that's some kind of a driver to the function. Is it a learned behavior? Is it did they learn to get somebody's attention? I do it this way, and then I get your attention. And there's lots of other things. Is it one of the things I talk about, but by the way, when I'm talking about drivers, is I talk about this notion of human irresponsibility, which is basically sometimes children, young people in their learning environments, they make mistakes. And we don't have to go out of our way to kind of think that we need to develop an all-encompassing, complicated support plan or solution to that. Maybe they just made a mistake. We call it a human irresponsibility. I didn't mean to knock the cup over. I didn't mean to go, okay, I was chatting to the person next to me. That particular day I was feeling particularly vulnerable or grumpy, or and is it just a one-off? Is it a mistake? And maybe just a little kind of an interaction on a relationship basis between staff and child, whatever, might just that might be the beginning, middle, and end of it, But if it then becomes a pattern of behavior, we have to think, right, now that actually it's not just a one-off, it's not a mistake, it's not something that's just happening because of one event kind of leads to another. But so you are thinking about sensory needs, learned behaviors. Social and emotional development is a big one. We work with a lot of children in learning environments where the teacher, for instance, is under pressure for the child to achieve outcomes related to their chronological age. But socially, because we do a lot of assessments of children's social and emotional development, and socially and emotionally, the child might be 4, but they're in year 5. Chronologically, they're 10, 11 years of age. That's a really hard one, because the teacher is still, and the staff in that classroom are still under pressure, are still being told you have to deliver outcomes based on the chronological age. And our role is to be able to give the teacher the capacity to almost evidence, say, I understand that, but look, I'm actually teaching somebody who's socially and emotionally is a 4 or 5-year-old, and that might be driving their behaviors. So that can be a difficult one as well.
I think that's really, really difficult. I know one of the individuals I work with who is on the autistic spectrum, the goalposts for them all match kind of chronologically, like you've mentioned. And it's actually really difficult because this individual finds it really difficult to take instruction. I would argue that they have a lot of demand avoidance. And then you have to think about, well, we know what's driving the behavior. They're avoiding it because we're asking them to do something, or there's a perceived demand. But then there's still this bit pulling you, isn't there, of like, I need to show evidence, I need to make sure that they're meeting those expectations, and that, you know, that we're doing the right thing. So there's always almost like a tug of war, isn't there, between, we might know as practitioners what's driving it, but there's lots of pulls from different areas, aren't there? I'm actually quite conscious of time, John, because I literally listen. No, I could, and I've loved going on courses with you and hearing you talk about this, because it's so practical for staff. But if you could just finish the episode just with 3 top tips.
Yeah, I was thinking about this. I think consistency is probably one of the most important things as an adult in a learning environment you can try and achieve, because I think with a consistency of approach, the child begins to feel emotionally safe as much as anything else, because they know what they're getting from the adult. We start to feel emotionally unsafe, I think, when we're not sure how another human being is going to respond to us in any given context. I'm not sure about them. What are they? Okay, I'm starting to feel a bit emotionally unsafe. Children in a learning environment, if they're getting lots of different responses to same behaviors, for instance, or different responses in the same context from the same adult. So I respond differently to you today than I did yesterday. Or different adults respond differently to my behaviors depending on who the adult is. That creates uncertainty for the child, and then I think they do start to feel a little bit emotionally unsafe. So to go back to what I said at the start, we have to, as the professionals in the environment, we have to develop responses to these behaviors that will help the child to feel emotionally safe, and therefore develop a kind of a trust and an acceptance of what the adult is trying to do to support the child. So when we're asking, if we don't ask the questions, what's the function of the behavior? If we don't ask what's driving the behavior, if we don't want to explore the context in which the behavior is occurring, then we'll just react to it. And reacting to behaviors leads to inconsistency, because your reactions will be different every other time, because you're not actually you're not responding to the behavior, you're just reacting. Responding to behaviors, when you use the word respond, it presupposes that you've thought about it, that it's a planned. It can be dynamically planned. It's not like, it doesn't always have to be written down on a piece of paper, but you are planning it. You're planning. Your response is based on your interpretation of why the behavior is happening at this particular point in time. So lots of 3 top tips. Without not specific interventions or strategies, although they are important. I think it's just ask the question. Simple question, but then ask, if I am aware of what the function is, what's driving it? And then when you get to that, then start thinking about, okay, now how am I going to respond to that? Because he's not doing his maths because he's just been defiant and he wants to try and control my learning environment. He's doing it for a number of other reasons. I've got to that understanding through the process of asking what's the function of the behavior. So now I'm going to respond to that. I'm going to respond to that, and my response is going to be based on support, reassurance, scaffolding, those kind of things, and it'll happen again. Sometimes with behavior management, sometimes I say with behavior support strategies and interventions, or developing interventions with children and young people. Sometimes it's about just doing the same thing over and over and over again, because they start to believe you. They start to believe, oh, this guy's actually going to do the same thing again and again and again. I can trust him because I know when I do this, he'll do that. Or when I say this is the response I'll get, and so I can actually trust this guy. I might up front go, I don't like the way you respond to me, because it's like, I don't want to change this, but I don't want to do my maths or whatever it is, But so trust comes into it. So yeah, just consistency of response. But I think the important thing is, how did I get to that particular response? What was the process I went through for me to respond in that way? So consistency is important, but just as important
You've been
is
listening
that
to the Team
how
Teach
do I get
podcast.
to develop
It's been
that
great
response?
to have you here with us
back
as we
to what's the
discuss
function and what's
behaviour,
driving it.
communication, and the ways we can
that's
best
brilliant.
support
And you
those
said,
in
"Oh,
our
I
care."
don't know
Thanks
if
again,
I've got like
and I'll
the
see you next
practical
time.
tips that you're looking for." But actually, in that section at the end, we've kind of gone through that process again for those listening. So I think it's really, really helpful and practical for everyone listening. All that's left to say is thank you so much, John.
You're welcome. Enjoyed
and I'll
it.
catch up with you soon.